Joining us right now to talk about the developing situation, some of the latest items happening right now, is Michael Rubin from the American Enterprise Institute. And Michael, as always, it's great to talk to you.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so we call him the Chocolate King. Some folks call him the Willy Wonka of Ukraine here. Is there a stark difference between the newly elected president and what we had in Viktor Yanukovych?
Well, what we see with the new president is that he very much is a Ukrainian nationalist. Yanukovych was accused of really selling out to Russian influence. Now, Poroshenko has said that he's willing to sit down and negotiate with Vladimir Putin. He still wants to deal with the situation in the breakaway eastern provinces, but he shows that he's going to be no one's fool. The problem is simply a willingness to deal with this through diplomacy isn't going to be enough because the ball is still in Vladimir Putin's hands.
Yeah, let me follow that up because it doesn't seem like the United States is even able to deal with Vladimir Putin at this point. So how can we expect a newly elected Ukrainian president, who some folks still doubt the legitimacy of the election in the first place, how can we expect him to stand up to Putin?
Well, certainly, while people are going to object to his election in some of the eastern provinces, the fact of the matter is Poroshenko has the moral high ground because, after all, the Russian thugs in the eastern provinces were too afraid even to let the polling stations open. That said, the only hope in this, and I don't really hold out too much hope, is the fact that Vladimir Putin has clearly bit off more than he can chew. He was afraid, he was assuming that the Ukraine would simply roll over and cry uncle, and they've shown that they're not willing to do that.
Michael, what do you make of this election? Would you say it was free and fair?
Absolutely, it appears to have been free and fair. The problem was, in the breakaway eastern provinces, the Russian-backed militias refused to allow any of the polling stations to open. In Donetsk itself, the city that is, there wasn't a single polling station opened.
Yeah, and we've seen increased violence today in Donetsk as the Ukrainian government tries to reassert itself in that region. Michael, I want to quickly focus on something President Obama said in reaction to the election here. Despite provocations and violence, millions of Ukrainians went out to the polls throughout the country and even in parts of eastern Ukraine where Russian-backed separatist groups sought to disenfranchise entire regions. So what you're saying here is essentially kind of agreeing with President Obama, despite everything that Putin may or may not have done to try and disrupt these elections that they went through, and that everybody in the global community should view them as fair and valid.
Absolutely, I think people should view them as fair and valid. The problem is, of course, simply the nature of a dictatorship, and I'm talking about Russia now, is that the will of the people doesn't matter, nor do they necessarily respect the will of the people outside their country. And therefore, despite the fact that Poroshenko has a clear legitimacy to negotiate now on behalf of the Ukrainians, I don't think it's going to do that much, make that much difference if Vladimir Putin is insistent on causing trouble. And he may have put his neck out so far that even though he's been a bit bloodied, even though this is more expensive prospect than he was expecting because he has to subsidize all these newly Russian areas, the fact of the matter is he's not going to give in. And ultimately, this is going to be a continuing problem between the European Union more broadly and Russia.
Michael, while Putin says he'll respect the outcome of this election, what do you think he'll do next?
Well, ultimately, Vladimir Putin has also shown that you can't really trust his word. He can say anything, and unfortunately, there's too many naive people in the European Union and in Washington who are willing to believe him. As soon as we let our guard down, he makes another push into, be it the Ukraine, be it perhaps into the Baltics, Azerbaijan, or Kazakhstan. Ultimately, we've got to be on our guard. The big question I have is, what is the European Union going to do? Poroshenko says that he wants to have further integration with the European Union. If the European Union decides it's too dangerous to engage with the Ukraine, in effect, are they sacrificing them, despite the vote of the Ukrainian people, back towards Russia?
And that is a great question to ask, Michael, and it sets us up to talk about what's happening in Europe as we speak. We see sort of a reaction to the globalization that's happened over the last decade or 25 years, if you will, and a rise in populist movements in countries like the UK and elsewhere in Europe. Do you see Europe rejecting the Ukraine now and them kind of left with no choice other than to, find more help from Russia?
I see them as two very different issues with regard to the rise of the far right in Europe. I mean, that has a lot to do with the increase in immigration and so forth, and a backlash about what it means to be European. But when it comes to the integration with regard to the Ukraine, unfortunately, this really has been an existential challenge to the European Union, and they've been found wanting. The French are still going ahead as of today with their helicopter carrier sale towards Russia. They've delayed it until October or November, but they haven't taken it off the table. Steinmeier, who is the foreign minister of Germany, he used to be chief of staff to Chancellor Schroeder, who, of course, is in bed with Gazprom right now. And it's not a surprise that the Germans are being very mercantile in their response. And of course, the British are afraid really to do anything of consequence because Russian investment is pumping up the London real estate bubble. So ultimately, the European Union has got to decide what's more important, a short-term economic hit or long-term European identity, standing on principle, standing up for freedom or liberty.
And is there any indication at this point, because we know that the United States has pushed him to take that short-term economic hit, is there any indication that there's more willingness for Angela Merkel or Francois Hollande to do that?
Well, you know, I keep thinking back to when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and Margaret Thatcher said to George Bush, "Don't go wobbly on me now." There's no one to say that right now.
Now, that's not good to hear, Michael Rubin. Great to see you as always, and we'll look forward to checking back in with you in the near future. Not a lot of optimism there, and so we got to keep watching the situation in Ukraine, and especially it's confounding to see Vladimir Putin, a guy who seems so desperate based on his economy, continue to make strides that appear to be negative towards the interests of the United States.
Indeed, we'll see how that unravels.
All right, Francesca Page, thanks for sticking around with us. Of course, always a great opportunity for you to weigh in here on America's Forum. You can tell us, what do you think about the situation dealing with Ukraine now and the increased violence we're seeing in that region? You can reach out to us on social media. Find us on Twitter at NewsmaxTV, the hashtag there, America's Forum. Connect at NewsmaxTV.com is the email address, and Facebook.com/NewsmaxTV is the way you can reach out to us on Facebook. And we'll be back right after this break with your responses.